species is brought under human control to the purposes of providing humans with a steady supply of food and/or other raw materials. Fertile Crescent, a crescent-shaped region of the modern Middle East, in which the earliest experiments in plant and animal domestication are believed to have occurred. Later, the location for the earliest known human settlements, villages, cities, and civilizations.
The Fertile Crescent. Okay, remember the Fertile Crescent was. Did I post it?
Sir, is that like the between of the two rivers?
Between the rivers, you got it. Yes, of ancient Mesopotamia, it's called. Yes, and we're going to learn about that. That was ancient Mesopotamia. We're going to learn about that tomorrow. Okay, the land between the rivers of the Tigris and the Euphrates. Okay, Sabrina, continue.
Steps leading to the development of early cities. 1. Hunter-gatherers. 2. Early farmers. Domestication of plants and animals. 3. Permanent homes. Stayed in one place. Develop new skills. More complex tools. 4. Improved farming methods. Irrigation. Controlled water supply. Prevented famine and starvation. Plow. Improved farming skills. 5. Surplus. Excess food used for trade. More free time for people to develop other useful skills. 6. Development of trade. Greater interaction and exchange between cultures. 7. Population growth. Allowed people to specialize in crafts. Development of social levels leads to a leadership of government.
Good. So this is essentially these 7 steps is how we got here. Okay. As we enter the stage of prehistory and now antiquity, early civilizations. These 7 are the steps. This is how we got here. It took hundreds of thousands of years to get here, but we got here, okay? Entering now what we call the Neolithic era. And let's go through the characteristics of civilizations. Sarah.
Awesome. Characteristics of civilization: centralized government, established rules and laws, better organization of economy, agricultural intensification,
Irrigation.
Sorry, I'm having a brain fart. Irrigation projects
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, to reclaim land.
Calendar system to plan planting and harvesting of crops, rise in productivity, more secure year-round food supply, specialization in occupations, government, record keepers, judges, carpenters, bakers, brewers, teachers, priests, etc.
Good. So you get a specialization in occupations. You start to get new jobs. People are starting to do new things, right? Not just going into the fields and the forest looking for mushrooms and berries, but they actually have real jobs now, okay? Teachers, priests, bakers, carpenters, weavers, etc.
Class structure. Private ownership of land emerged, which creates a desire for more land leads to the unequal distribution of wealth. Early civilizations had a sharp distinction between nobles and commoners. Merchants and trades. Trading of manufactured good and luxury goods. Rise of merchant class shops and markets. Development of currency. Development of science and writing. Metallurgy, wheel, bake, bricked, mortar, simple machines, specialized tools. Writing for recording laws, religious texts, and accounting. Next is state religion. Strong link between religion and centralized government. Religion used to legitimize the authority of the government. Rivers. Earliest civilization developed along river valleys. Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and China.
Good. Thank you so much, Sabrina and Sarah. So this is what you read about. For those of you that read the text, this is basically what it did. It broke down the characteristics of a civilization and also how we got here. Okay. So this is it. Centralized government, right? Improvements in agriculture, different jobs, a class structure emerges, right? Private ownership of land. Okay. unequal distribution of wealth, state religion, this link between a religion and a centralized government. Okay, this is all new in the early Neolithic era.
Sir, I have a question.
Sure.
When like in all the readings, like they imply that the class structure is like inherent to all civilizations, but do you like necessarily agree with that? Do you think there can be a classless society?
Oh, we'll get there later. Well, yeah.
All right, sir. Thanks.
That's a deep question. Yeah. Thank you. I'll try to answer that later. But yeah, so all of these things we have to think about, right? We have to think about when we talk about civilizations. Okay, and hopefully for those of you that did not read, make sure you read your text. Okay, because some of your questions were about that. Next, we get to the emergence of religion, and today is going to be about creation stories. Okay, creation stories. So, Tina, can you read this for me? When did we think for the longest time we actually thought, okay, that the year of creation was this date right here. Can you read this, Tina?
Sure, sir. So, Early Humans, Theory of Evolution Review Notes. Biblical story of creation, Genesis, went unchallenged for centuries. In the 18th century, Irish Archbishop James Ussher determined year of creation was October 23rd, 4004 BC. Most 19th century Europeans believed in the great chain of being, where all living organisms were ranked in importance. Humans were at the top.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so October 23rd, 4004 BC, right? That was year of creation. Okay, a 1700 Irish archbishop named James Ussher, and of course we all know the biblical story of creation in Genesis. Okay, and this was understood until this man came along, and you read about him. But I'm just going to give you some notes. So if you can just copy this down, I'm going to give you some notes today. Let's start with the early humans. Okay. Now, some of you want to copy this down. You could come back later too and copy it down. Now, Charles Darwin is someone many of you might have learned before. I'm not going to spend too much time on him, but I do want to just go over this a little bit because I wasn't able to go through it a couple days ago. So I just want to tell you about Charles Darwin. Okay. So Tina, you could keep reading.
All right, so Charles Darwin from 1809 to 1882. So Charles Darwin was a British scientist who laid foundation for theory of evolution. He observed a huge variety of fossils and living organisms. He was a biologist and explored the world, HMS Beagles in 1830 to 1836, and observes direct action to the physical world induced by biological adaptations. So he was an older scientist who rejected evolution because it meant that species mutate, so change, yet goes against the Bible theory. His new ideas were bound to lead to the questioning of man's place in nature. So he wrote the book Origin of Species by Means Natural Selection, 1859. This book was a direct challenge to Genesis and brought debate of evolution, but did not invent the idea. Theory of evolution by natural selection. Darwin understood from his voyage to Galapagos Island on the Beagle that certain species survived, but how? No evidence of earlier man, no archaeological evidence found. Evidence not used. Skull found in Gibraltar in 1848, and there was a skull found in Neanderthal, Germany in 1856. So Darwin, his idea stressed that progress and improvement of a species created by overpopulation and the struggle for scarce resources, a struggle that eventually leads to the survival of the fittest. So this natural struggle between food supply and species. Those with favorable variations would be better suited to the environment they would survive and therefore pass on through hereditary those favorable variations. So young pass on favorable variations to the next generation, so heredity, which will lead to the progress and improvement of species. Those with variations detrimental to their well-being would die, thereby preventing negative mutations from being passed on. All related organisms descended from common ancestors. Darwin backed up theories with hundreds of pages of facts and observations. Reactions to Darwin's theory. Biologists argue that Darwin could not prove his hypothesis, and most publicized attacks came from religious groups who saw evolution on attack on Christianity.
Good. Thank you so much. Okay, so I have your notes of mine. And again, these notes go on and talk about his supporters like Thomas Huxley and Thomas Malthus and Gregory Mendel. So you don't need to know that, but you have it here if you do want to read and continue. I do recommend that you do. But today we're just going to focus on Charles Darwin and the creation stories. So that was a little history of Charles Darwin, and let me show you his biography here, just a couple minutes.
He trained to be a doctor, but couldn't stand watching surgery. He studied to be a clergyman, but that didn't work out either. Instead, he ended up shocking the world with an idea, an hypothesis of where we all come from. Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution.
In spite of my formal training in physics and my love of Galileo and Copernicus, I might just put Charles Darwin a notch above each of them. Because the Darwinian evolution affects human beings and the knowledge of where we came from much more directly than Galileo or even Copernicus or Einstein.
It was a discovery that almost didn't happen. When the British Royal Navy planned a scientific expedition, Darwin was offered a position as naturalist. His father didn't want him to go. The captain wasn't eager to have him along either. But at the last minute, Darwin went aboard. As the HMS Beagle traveled down the coast of South America, the young man marveled at the incredible variety of plants and animals he saw.
Here was an individual who fundamentally looked at the world. He didn't have elaborate instrumentation. He wasn't looking out at the stars. He wasn't looking with a microscope into the cell. He was just looking.
It was while observing the birds of the Galapagos Islands that Darwin made his most famous discovery. He counted 13 different types of finch on separate islands, some with long beaks, some with short ones, all sorts of variations. He wondered if nature had, over generations, adjusted the finches in varying ways to cope with their surroundings.
He began to come up with the idea of natural selection, that species tend to perish if they're not well adapted to their environment, and they tend to thrive and reproduce if they are.
It was, Darwin reasoned, the survival of the fittest or the swiftest, the one with the longest neck or sharpest beak. Over thousands and thousands of years, that was the way species evolved. Darwin kept researching until he was 50. In 1859, he finally published Origin of Species, which laid out his theory of evolution. The book sold out in a day, and the controversy began. In 19th century Victorian England, the book of Genesis was gospel, and the gospel said that God created Earth's creatures. Evolution seemed to fly right in the face of the Bible. The commotion would only grow louder when Darwin announced that the human species was a product of the evolutionary process too. That man was descended from apes and monkeys was an almost unthinkable notion in Darwin's day.
The concept, the thought of evolving from some substandard creature, or what you think to be substandard, is almost an insult to people. And, a lot of people don't want to hear that. And sorry, but that's the way it is.
Today, Darwin's ideas are widely accepted, and yet they remain controversial. For they permanently dethroned man from his central place in the history of the Earth.
Okay. So that is Charles Darwin. Okay. And again, if I have more here that you can read about later in this package. Okay. So you should read that later. But today our focus is the creation stories of many different civilizations: Chinese, Japanese, Mayan, Greco-Roman, Judeo-Christian. Okay. So our focus today is going to be on the stories of creation. Okay. Now, the stories of creation, let's start with the one we know best, right? The Bible, the Genesis, the creation story. Okay. I have here another video to start us off. Okay. And I'm sure some of you have seen this, but I really like it. It's one of my favorites. Let's start.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Then God separated the water and the sky. He formed the seas and the land. Then he covered the land with trees and plants. Then he filled the world with all the creatures of the sea. Of the air. And all the creatures of the ground. And then he made us. To live in paradise. Until Adam and Eve disobeyed God and ate the forbidden fruit. And with one choice, they learned both good and evil. Since then, since Cain killed Abel, God has seen too much evil in human hearts. Wrong choices, wrong decisions. That's why this is happening. Our Creator decided to cleanse the earth. God warned me. He told me to build a boat. A boat to save our family and all the animals. Every other living creature would die. And on the seventh day, God rested. after the floodwaters engulfed the world, the Bible describes a new beginning for Noah's descendants and a chance to restore the relationship between God and humanity. A new faith in an all-powerful creator is being born.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Any questions for me before we move on here? Okay. So what I have for you to do now is a creation stories. Okay, reading, chart, and questions. I'm sure you saw I posted it here, stories of creation. Okay. Again, let me start you off with the reading first. So Unit 1, Civilizations of the Near and Far East, Humanity Before Civilization. Sabrina, continue reading.
Common to most societies is the question of human origins. This unit begins by addressing this very question. Where did we come from and what is our place in the world? By comparing a variety of stories of creation and examining the evidence for evolution, Chapter 2 provides a fascinating look at the origins of humanity. The chapter concludes with a focus on the Neolithic Revolution and its significance to the emergence of the first civilizations. The remaining 3 chapters of this unit provides a look at some of the earliest civilizations in the world, including Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and India. The common thread throughout these chapters is the role that major rivers played in the development of the civilizations. While the rivers around which each civilization settled allowed for permanent cities to arise and the development of complex societies, each region provided a unique culture which was the product of the environment and the people.
Good. Thank you. Okay, start with just this first paragraph, stories of creation.
Stories of creation. The summaries of these creation stories chosen are representative of the civilizations covered in this text. The belief and ideas held by these civilizations about the origins of humanity and the earth appear in various forms, from a simple account listing events in order of occurrence to a complex narrative that details the creation of humans, their environment, and the rest of the cosmos. Many of these stories were not intended as factual accounts and were not intended for literal interpretation. Yet they are valid accounts, if even only in a symbolic or spiritual sense, and are important as part of the beliefs of a civilization.
Good. I think that's really important, that last part. So many of these stories were not intended as factual accounts and were not intended for a literal interpretation. Yet they are valid accounts, even if even only in a symbolic or spiritual sense, and are important as part of the beliefs of a civilization. Okay, so this is what you're going to be reading for me today, the stories of creation. Now let's go through the different civilizations you're going to learn about, specifically their creation stories. Okay, our first civilization is Mesopotamia, this one here, and that's where it starts. So you have Mesopotamian civilization. You're going to learn about the beginning of Egypt and its civilization and creation story. China and India's creation stories. Greece and Rome. Islamic, okay? Islam and Japanese mythology. Mayan. And last, the Judeo-Christian story of creation. Okay, so Jewish and Christian have very similar histories and stories. Okay. And then we start with rivers and civilizations. So again, each of these civilization, again, it's just a couple paragraphs for each one. Okay, just a very short explanation of how these creation stories started. Now, I'm not going to expect you to remember all of this, okay, because there's a lot here, and there's going to be a lot of words that will be new to you, a lot of different gods, different mythologies and terms. I don't expect for you to remember all of this, but you are going to go through it and do a few things for me. So number one, let's take a look at your work. Click here, Stories of Creation. Here's the instructions. Okay. So right now you're going to take maybe 20 minutes to read the text, Stories of Creation. Then you're going to go and complete my chart organizer that I've made for you here. Okay. You can download this. And in point form, you are going to complete this chart for each story. And then I have 3 reflection questions based on the reading. I'm going to be marking this. So again, I want you to take your time. I'm going to go through these questions real quick. Okay, so number 1 asks, how have legends that you've read assisted in our understanding of the past? What legends can you think of which may provide clues to our past? Interesting. Number 2, compare the similarities of the creation stories found in this chapter. Consider the creator figure, why the world came into being, and an explanation of the creation of humanity and nature. There's a lot, when you read these creation stories, you're going to find a lot of similarities, especially when you think of the stories in the East and the stories in the West. For example, Mesopotamia and Egypt have a very similar history. Greece and Rome have very similar creation stories. Israel and Christianity have very similar creation stories. So compare. And the last one is, having read a variety of stories related to creation, try your own hand at coming up with an explanation for the origins of the world. Write your myths as if you are telling it to a Neolithic audience who do not have the benefits of modern science. Okay, so these are just 3 simple reflection questions for you. Okay. Are there any questions for me before I let you get started with your reading?
No, sir.
Oh, come on.
I do have a question. I'm just trying to pull up the questions, because I had a question on one of.
Yeah.
Okay, so for what legends can you think of which may provide clues to the past? Is that legends that we read in the articles, or legends like we've heard on our own?
Well, you can incorporate or include legends that you've heard elsewhere, but I would try to focus for the reading. This is all based on the reading.
Okay. And then so when coming up with an explanation for the origins of the world, that's based on the reading too. We kind of just like, do we choose one, or do we just make something up?
Oh, this is for number 3 you're
Yeah.
talking about, right? Yeah, so once you've read all of them, then you could kind of come up with your own, how you would describe to a Neolithic audience who have no idea about, creation stories and any of that. How would you tell them? What story would you come up with? How would you create it? Yeah.
Okay.
I hope that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. And like, do you want 10 sentence, like how on average, what are you expecting for each response?
Good question. So for each one, you can see here, again, they can be in point form. I mean, try to fill out the chart the best you can. I am going to look for this part for effort and how much you were able to extract from the text. I mean, 10 is a good number. 10, if you want to go 10 to 15 or 10 to 20, that's fine. Short points, guys. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to cover everything.
I meant in regards to like the questions, like each question that we're handing in.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, these questions should not be in point form. They should be.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of points, just like a short paragraph for each. It could just be a paragraph for each question. Yeah.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, guys. So again, this is a really good reading because it really gets us started with these civilizations, right? Creation stories matter. They were very, very important to every one of these civilizations. It was everything. If you want to understand civilizations in the past, you have to understand the creation stories. Okay. Okay, guys. If again, if you have any more questions, you can ask. You can even ask